Tell us about your childhood. Where were you born, educated, and describe your first environments.
I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. My first environment, I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. I was born in the inner cities of Kingston, Jamaica. I was born in an area called Jonestown. I don't know much about Jonestown as a child because as much as I was born there, I wasn't raised there. My mom had 5 other children before myself, and my mom was one of those person that moved around a lot in Kingston. So even though I know Jonestown, I was not raised in Jonestown. I went to a school called Central Branch in Kingston, which was actually neighboring Jonestown, and I've spent a few years at Central Branch. I lived in Jonestown. I lived in places like Honor Garden. I lived in Mountain View. I lived in Marvelly. I lived quite a few places in Kingston, so I know a lot about Kingston on a whole.
What kind of areas were they? Were they suburbia, country? Was it violent neighborhood or?
All those neighborhoods that I just named: Jonestown, Mountain View, Marvelly, Honor Garden, which is known more as Jungle. Those are pretty much some of Kingston's violent capital. Mountain View Avenue is a long stretch of road. It has a few patches on the road that are renowned violent neighborhoods. I'm from one of the most renowned areas in Mountain View Avenue. Believe it or not, it's a combination of about 3 or 4 streets. I'm from the Jakes Road area. Jakes Road back then was called Las Vegas for one reason or another. It's just one of those neighborhoods that low-income families had took over, and politicians kind of like found it attractive, and somehow guns were probably more than just, to see people get shot or people get killed, or early morning police raids for one reason or another. That was pretty much the norm of my youth. I attended Central Branch. Even when I lived in the Mountain View area, I attended Central Branch all in school back then. In school, I was pretty much a scholar. I did well in school despite the environment that I grew up in. I grew up with a single mom and brothers and sisters.
Growing up in such a violent neighborhood and violent surroundings and attending school must have been a task. My next question mirrors the environment that you grew up in, and that is how or why did you get into writing?
Well, I think writing is a natural thing for me. My mom wrote a lot. She didn't write books, but my mom was one of those persons that were quicker to write a letter than she would have a conversation with someone. And I've always credited that I believe genetically I got my writing from my mom. But at a very young age, I would say, I was about 7 years old, I started to write, and I find myself writing poetry, and I found rhyming poetry came very easy to me.
So would you say it was kind of like an escape writing?
I wouldn't say initially it was an escape. Eventually it became an escape, but initially my writing started out as a hobby, something that I like doing.
Okay. So what were your first writings about, and what did you do with them?
My first writing was music. Going back to the environment that I grew up in. Places like Jonestown, places like Marvelly. There are places that a lot of Jamaican dancehall stars were born from, so growing up around sound systems, I was encouraged or influenced or motivated, so to speak, by music. So I started writing lyrics, and I was very successful. I made a name for myself as a child artist back then. I equate myself with some of the most renowned music studio that was around at the time, such as King Jammy Studio, Tubby Studio, Black Scorpio Studio. There were artists that was around us every day. You know, they were renowned Jamaican artists. That was people that we see on a daily basis because they were one of us. There was people such as General Trees, Echo Minot, and when I went across like to Waterhouse, where the studio located, there was a vast of entertainment, Chaka Demus, Admiral Bailey, you name them, everybody was there.
So why did you not continue into the songwriting or the music industry?
Well, you know what? Music, by that time, my writing and music, it was still a hobby, but it then turned to an escape. And like I was saying, I was doing very good in the music business. My neighborhood was marvelously. Washington Boulevard was one of those places that separate the two neighborhoods. And as a child, on my side of the boulevard, I wore the crown, you know. There were upcoming artists, some of them are successful today, some unfortunately died, but the race included myself. There was Punnyman, today is Eineman. Back then, initially we named him Punnyman for one reason or another, so he was more on my team. Across the way there was people like Rista Benji, there's people like Beanie Man, but nobody had actually gained any real fame or success at the time. I got my break at, interestingly, I went to King Tubby Studio once for an audition, and I failed the audition. The guy says I was too fast, too quick, offbeat and so on, but after relentlessly visiting King Jammy Studio, I got my chance to record, and I was recorded by an engineer named Squinching at the time. But unfortunately, Squinching died shortly after I made my first record in the studio, and that track just never made it to fame. You know, it was just one of those things. I think after Squinching died, I kind of took it like it was just not meant to be. I mean, other people by that time was making headway, such as Risto Benji, such as Beanie Man. They had their record, and I migrated anyway. I migrated to Philadelphia, and by the time I got to Philadelphia, I just kind of left the music business.
Okay. So, how did you become published, and have you ever been rejected by a publisher?
Well, before we discuss that part, I like to say, when I moved to Philadelphia, I continued to write. I wrote a lot of poetry. I had a girlfriend that was originally from down south. She was from a place called Bradley, South Carolina. Bradley, South Carolina is a little neighborhood outside of Greenwood, South Carolina. Greenwood, South Carolina is about an hour away from a bigger town called Greenville, South Carolina. And she encouraged me to write my poetry, because after she discovered that I could actually write poetry, she encouraged me to write poetry. And while I was living down south with her, I wrote a lot of poetry. And what I did with those poems was I took them to, first back then you had to get them notarized to like claim ownership. And then after you notarized them, you would send them off to the Library of Congress, and paid about $25 at the time, you know, to have them like copyrighted. So I've sent hundreds of poems to the Library of Congress. I'm sure they're still there somewhere in the archives, but I've yet to look back or reclaim them.
Okay.
And where my publishing, my first book was published in England, you know. I moved to England, I moved to Birmingham, England, and England is one of those countries to me that when I thought of England, it was like writers, the world of writers and people who are authors, they're from England, and I thought England would be the right place to to get my book published. I first contacted a publisher in London, asking if he could publish my book. He said, sure, send in the manuscript. Back then it was floppy disk, and I sent in my manuscript on a floppy disk, and he sent me a contract. The contract came with a fee that I didn't know at the time. I was a little naive at the time, and they were asking about £3,500 for me to be published. And at that time, I've never seen that kind of money in English pounds, so I was working back then at a factory somewhere in West Bromwich near Birmingham, and I couldn't do it. I was a little disappointed, but I kept on writing, and I decided to do a postcard, a greeting card back then. And I went to Birmingham Public Library, and then I asked one of the lady in the poetry department of Birmingham Library, is it okay if I could put up like an ad? I'm looking for artists, and the ad allowed artists that were visiting the library to see it, and then they contacted me. And one of my first published items was actually a greeting card that I collaborated with a Chinese artist. We made a postcard together, and I manually distribute them around Birmingham in like news agents and places like that. They sold, but not as much, and I was pretty proud of myself anyway that I produced a greeting card. And it was after the greeting card that that motivated me more, that if I could do a greeting card, then I definitely could publish a book.
Okay, so tell me more about your first published book.
After the greeting card, I decided to self-publish self-publish my first book. And my first book was titled Words. And it was just a book of poems, and I printed off I created some poems, selected like the best 35 that I liked, and took them pretty much to a neighborhood printer. I think back then there was a printing branch in Birmingham called Colquitt, and I asked the guy, is it possible that he could run me off about 5,000 copies? That was after I acquired ISBN numbers and so on and so forth. And I printed my first book. It's not my most proud project, but it is my most proud project, but it's not my favorite book today, because I would say I rushed in because I was anxious to see my work in print. But today, when I look back at that book, the grammatical errors and the font size and the chosen fonts, it was just, it's not up to professional standard, but at the end of the day, it's a book. And I remember after getting them from the printer, I remember I just could not get enough of that book. I probably slept with one of the book on my coffee table, on my bedside table, for maybe about 2 months straight, just kind of like overwhelmed and, personal pride, just happiness about that accomplishment. So that was my first book. It was a book of poems.
Okay. So have you published any other person other than yourself?
Yes, I've published a few other people other than myself. I've published an author in Jamaica. His book was kind of like an autobiography. It was titled My Best Friend, My Best Man and My Assassin. That was his book. And I published another gentleman in Birmingham. He wanted to publish a collection of poems that he had. So I published that for him a few years ago. And a few other people I've published, including my wife. She's an artist. Well, I produce this on her behalf every year, an annual art magazine where I contribute as the writer, the article contributor in it, and that's an annual publish. But I'm open to publish anyone. You know, I am behind a publishing house, Sebastian Books. I'm actually the executive director behind Sebastian Books, and there's a website, and it's open to people who want to be published.
So we see the likes of J.K. Rowling, Jackie Collins, for instance, and we can see how profitable and how financially great writing is through them. How about you? Is writing profitable and financially sound for you?
J.K. Rowling, I don't know, much. The paper says she's successful financially. Jackie Collins, growing up as a child, I heard a lot about her, seen a lot of Jackie Collins' book, and I would assume that these people are wealthy from their work. But growing up in Kingston, Jamaica, where I was close-knit to artists who had #1 hits, and I see that they got more fame than they actually have money. I'm not so sure how it works in the writing world, especially today. For me, I do make money from my writing, but I wouldn't consider myself wealthy. You see, the thing is, when you write, you're selling literature, and let's be fair, not a lot of people out there are excited or can't wait to buy the next book. So my books sell, and they sell at a very slow pace, but they do sell. And when they do sell, they give me some form of comfort. They give me some form of excitement, not only for the financial gain, but for the simple fact that someone out there thinks that my book is worthy of buying. I would love to be a wealthy author from my work, not only for the desire to be financially secure, but just to see that people think that my work values their money. So, no, not yet. I'm not a wealthy author. I'm a successful author, but I wouldn't call myself a wealthy author.
Okay. Why do you continue to write?
I just love writing. Writing does everything to me. You know, some people smoke cigarette, some people have to have a drink, or some people have other things that console them. Writing does it for me. Writing is my everything. I just love writing. I love expressing myself with words, and over the years, it's like anything else. The more I write, the better I realize that I get at it. And writing is a powerful instrument. I mean, it is true when they say the pen is mightier than the sword. I mean, I love writing. I love the fact that I've mastered art, and I love the fact that I can use it efficiently. I just love writing. Whether or not I make millions or nothing of it, I will always write.
Okay. How do you feel about e-writers, e-publishing and Kindle, etc.?
I'm not gonna lie. I understand. I do embrace new technology, but I'm not a fan of e-writers. I'm not a fan of e-publishers. I like books. I like real books. And I understand that the individuals who came about with e-writing, they've got all this so-called sound reason as to why we should divert from paper and go on to virtual writing. But other than the fact that it's easier to carry 6 books in a Kindle than to carry 6 books in a bag, I don't like e-writers because the whole e-writing opportunity has brought this cast of wannabe authors, wannabe writers that didn't even have a passion for writing, and now they're like, everybody's a writer, because they can just upload or download or produce something in a PDF and it's considered a book. And there's just something about that offends me for people who, in reality, that doesn't have a passion for the art, but because this opportunity comes where they can hide behind a computer screen and do it. I'm not one for e-writers. I don't support them. I'm sure some of the e-writers are people who, like myself, who are very passionate and take writing personal, but on an overall general vote, thumbs down for e-writers, and same for e-publishing. E-publishing has opened doors. It make it easy for people who want to be publishers, or people who just, they're money hungry people who really don't have any passion for literature or what it represents. So when it comes to virtual writing, I'm a blogger, so I do write online, but my blogs are for free. They're just my opinion, and anybody out there looks in the search engine for a particular thing and come across my blog, and if it helps even one person, then that's fine. It's for free, it's not for sale. And for me, blogging is just like working out. You know, it's my in-between of writing books or writing real articles. But that's how I feel about the whole virtual wave of writing.
What are your favourite topics to write about?
Reality. I write only about reality. I struggle if I have to write something fictional. So anything to do with real life occurrences or real life incidents, I'm all over it.
Okay. Which of your books is your favourite?
My favourite book is my first book, Words, because it put me on the map as an author.
Cool. Name and describe your titles, published or unpublished.
Oh, I've got quite a few titles. There's Words, which is a poetry book, my first book. There's Best of Me, which is also poetry. There is Roy. I wrote Roy. Roy was inspired by my son, my youngest son. His name isn't Roy, but Roy was written for him. It's a children's book that pretty much tells about, encourage children to split playtime with learning time. That book was written by myself, and the illustrations were contributed by my wife. And it has a sister book as well, which is titled Pearl. Pretty much the same thing, but a girl's version of Roy. Then I've got My Only Hope with Panic Attack. That is also reality based upon my experience with panic attack. I have Survive, which was my autobiography, which is my autobiography. Starts when I was about 9 years old and all the way up until I was about 35, I believe. In between, there's a lot of other books. I mean, we could name so much book, but if you go on my website, you'll see the rest of my titles, which includes Death Before Death, Confession of an Undertaker. One of the last book I start writing was called Cold in the Snow. On the cover, you'll realize it's Matterhorn Mountain, because that book in particular is about my life experience in Switzerland. Cold in the Snow, pretty much Switzerland is a predominantly white country, so that represents the snow, and coal, which charcoal is normally expected to be black, and that represents myself. So it's pretty much like cold in the snow.
Okay. Which of your books has been a bestseller?
I believe Sebàs is my bestseller.
And how does that make you feel?
Oh, it makes me feel proud. I mean, every time a book is sold, every time someone buys my book, especially online, I get a personal notification. And even if it's sparingly that those notification comes in, it does make me feel proud that someone out there still believes in buying an actual book and still think my book is worthy of their money.
Why did you write Survived? What reason?
I was born in the slums, and I moved to Southwest Philadelphia from Kingston, Jamaica. That was pretty much like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Southwest Philadelphia was no real safe haven. It was no different from Kingston, Jamaica, where I was coming from. And growing up in those two environments, it is expected that people such as myself should turn out to be criminal, turned out to be dead before 20 or spend the rest of their life in prison. It was a stressful life, but I found the energy and the strength to overcome it. And I wrote Survive for personal release, just to, sometimes, you know, you backtrack about your life and it does stress you out when you look back. And I didn't want to look back anymore. I decided to write, well, I didn't decide. My wife, after telling her a little about my life, she encouraged me that maybe you should put it in a book. And it was a great advice, because I put it in a book and it took a lot off me. It's like after writing it, all that pressure that was on your shoulder, on your back, you know, it's no longer there. And also the book is there as a reference. You know, I want people to read my book and be entertained, but most of all be motivated to say, if he's done it, then I could do it too.
Will there be a sequel or a documentary movie follow-up to Survived?
I'm contemplating on a sequel. I've started to draft a sequel that's called Prosperity, because Survive is such a final title, you know. Survive. People want to know what happened after you survived that ordeal or ordeals. So I'm being encouraged, and I've started to write Prosperity, which is also another book to add to the motivation of Survive. But yes, I've actually published a documentary recently called The Preparation of Survive. I just put that out there. I believe I put it on YouTube just for free, just for fans of Survive to know that don't go to sleep, you know, something is still in the works, you know, so we're still working on the documentary film. The biopic is expected to come out. I've just kind of like want to reach out to people who are mentioned in the book to put them an alert that this film is going to come out and this person is going to play you and is going to, you know.
Okay. How do you feel about Survived being unedited, and why was it, or why is it unedited?
It's unedited, and it's raw, and it's unedited. This means that half of the book is not tweaked grammatically. I'm pleased with the fact that it's raw and unedited, because it will give the readers how I wrote it in its raw format. The reason why it ended up raw, to be raw and unedited is when you're writing an autobiography, you have to go back down memory lane. And writing the book, it did take a toll on me. I was the head of the editing team, and it got so overwhelming that I got ill, you know, after rereading the book. And I told the team we'll abandon it and we'll put it out just like that. And that's how Survive became Survive Raw and Unedited.
Okay. Why are you called ENT Sebàs, and what does it mean to you? Do you want your real identity to be a secret?
ENT Sebàs is an adapted name. The reason behind ENT Sebàs it's very personal to me and my family, one which I don't wish to disclose at this time, but obviously it's not my real name. My personal identity is not a secret, but I took on the identity of ENT Sebàs to be known as an author. ENT Sebàs means to me, I've been reborn, it's a rebirth. It was not the same person from Philadelphia. It was not the same person from Jamaica. So ENT Sebàs reminds me that I gave myself a rebirth.
Are you proud to be a Jamaican writer?
I wouldn't call myself a Jamaican writer. I'm a Jamaican by default. I was born in Jamaica, so I'm a Jamaican. And I'm a proud writer. I wouldn't say I'm a Jamaican writer because my writing, it's not pro-Jamaican. When I write on issues that concern Jamaica, some of it are positive issues and some of it are denouncing issues. So I wouldn't say I'm a Jamaican writer. I would just say I'm a writer who was born in Jamaica. I'm a proud writer. I love the fact that I write, and I love the fact that my writing has affected people, and people has embraced my writing and has extended the credits to me.
Okay. And what can we expect from E&T Sebàs in the future?
More writing, you know. I will forever write. As long as my brain and my fingers continue to work, I will forever write. Writing is my life.